Right. So our first Sunday without Jono and Yvonne. It's a big moment for us. Big moment for me. Suddenly everything relies on me. No, that's not true. Everything relies on God. But seriously, do keep me and the leadership team in your prayers. So we've got a meeting next Sunday with the leadership team as we're going to be just working out, I guess, what this interim time will look like as we think about where God is leading us. So we're having a discussion next Sunday afternoon about who will be the interim pastor while we discern where God is leading us in terms of a future senior pastor. So please keep the leadership team in your prayers, particularly for next Sunday during that meeting, and just that God will be guiding us and we'll be listening to Him. Alrighty. I think I've got control. Yes, that's me. I'm speaking today. Good. All right. So we're back in our 10 Steps to Freedom. If you remember, we started this it was end of September, so that's 2 months ago at least. 2 months ago. We're going through the 10 Commandments, and just as a reminder, why are we calling the 10 Commandments 10 Steps to Freedom? Well, actually, we believe that freedom is found in being in God's will. So doing what God requires. God has made us in a particular way. He's made life to work in a particular way, and we find the greatest freedom when we live in alignment with what He says. And we get this from 1 John 5. He says, "This is how we know that we love the children of God, by loving God and carrying out His commands. In fact, this is love for God, to keep His commands." So we show our love to God by keeping His commands, and His commands are not burdensome. So it's not like this massive list of do's and don'ts that, we're constantly stressing about, are we doing it, are we not? Actually, God has made it so that keeping His commands is actually the way that we work best. It actually fits with who we are. And we're going to do a bit of a recap of where we've come from because it's been a few weeks so you might have forgotten. So we started off, commandment number 1, God and God alone. We find freedom in acknowledging that God is God and we are not. It doesn't rely on us. God is in control. There is freedom in relinquishing control to Him. Secondly, directing your worship well. We are habitual worshippers. God has made us to worship. But true freedom is found in directing our worship away from ourselves, away from the things of this earth that we think will satisfy us, but don't really satisfy us, and onto God, the only one who can truly satisfy. Number 3, living for the name. Now, unfortunately, just this week we saw another example, didn't we, of the damage that can be caused by people who misrepresent God and God's name. But we can find freedom in realizing that we don't have to strive to make our own names great because Jesus has already received the name that is above all names. Number 4, rest matters. There is freedom in pursuing intentional work-rest balance. Not work-life balance. Work and life are not opposites, as Jono told us. Work-rest balance, because both work and rest are good things that God has made us for. So we find freedom in making sure we are working well and resting well, intentionally. Number 5, relearning honour. So Jono presented that freedom comes from learning to honour our parents and choosing to speak well of them, even when we've had bad relationships with them. So even though we may not have had the best experience growing up with our parents, actually, we find freedom in honouring our parents because they are our parents and speaking well about them, finding the best things that we can share about our parents. And just the very last one that we did was, so commandments number 6 and 7. that murder and adultery begin in the heart. So these things that, we think, there's such big, terrible sins there, I'd never even think of doing that. Well, actually, Jesus says in our hearts is where it starts. But we can find freedom in learning to honour life, the life that God has made, and honouring God with our bodies. And so now we get to Numbers 8 and 9. So Commandments 8 and 9, I'm going to call this one Looking Out for the Interests of Others. And next week we'll be doing our final talk in the series. Simone will be sharing with us about contentment. So let's read together, shall we, from Exodus chapter 20. If you've got a Bible, please open it up to Exodus chapter 20, or you can follow along on the screen as well. So Exodus 20, starting from verse 1. And God spoke all these words. I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourself an image in the form of anything, in heaven above, or in the earth beneath, or in the waters below. You shall not bow down to them or worship them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, punishing the children for the sin of the parents to the third and fourth generation of those who hate me, but showing love to 1,000 generations of those who love me and keep my commandments. You shall not misuse the name of the Lord your God, for the Lord will not hold anyone guiltless who misuses his name. Remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. 6 days you shall labour and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, neither you, nor your son or daughter, nor your male or female servant, nor your animals, nor any foreigner residing in your town. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea and all that is in them, but he rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. Sorry, I'm not changing those slides, am I? You can't follow if you don't have a Bible. There we go. We're up to date now. Honour your father and your mother, so that you may live long in the land your God is giving you. You shall not murder. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not steal. You shall not give false testimony against your neighbour. Righto, so we're focusing on those last two. Don't steal and don't bear false witness. Now, I think both of these commandments are fairly straightforward, right? Don't take what's yours, don't make up lies about people. It's pretty basic. I don't think there's anything particularly revolutionary about that. Now, something we need to remember about these commandments, and it's something that comes out quite clear, even I think most clearly in these two, is that these commandments were given to form the basis for the Israelite society. Right? This is like their constitution and their social interaction guide all rolled into one. This is how you will live together. Now, both of these commandments, you can see they're both designed to enable the Israelites to trust each other as they live together, right? So how good would it be if we could trust the people that we lived with? I don't think I need to tell you how freeing life would be if you could trust your neighbours. I don't know how many times, I can't count the number of times that people have said to me, oh, how terrible is it that you have to lock your door when you go out, right? They're thinking back to this time when, you could just walk out, leave your house open, and you could come back and know that everything would be there because you could trust your neighbours. That would be a great society to live in. But it's not our society, is it? Right? That's not the society we live in. But I think it's worth actually digging deeper into these commandments to see why these commandments are so much more than just a list of rules to kind of keep us in line and try and make society work well. So let's focus on this first one, don't steal. Now, don't steal, right? Fairly basic, don't take something that's not yours. But actually, I think this commandment is significantly broader than just that, don't steal. So it covers everything from burglary to pickpocketing, right? But it doesn't just stop there. See, I think it also includes dishonest business practices, wage theft, so underpaying your employees, that's stealing. Any sort of gaining an advantage by deception. So yes, I'm sorry to say, this is the commandment that tells us not to cheat on our tax returns. So basically, any time you gain something that you're not entitled to through some sort of underhand or dishonest means, that's stealing. Now, a classic example of this in the Bible is the loaded scales, right? So in their culture, if you're doing transactions or trades, everything is weighed on scales. And, a fairly easy thing for a merchant to do is to kind of stick a piece of iron or something on the bottom of one of the scales so that when you weigh it, it gives the wrong weight, right? And that is listed in the Bible as one of the things. In fact, God repeatedly says this is something that he hates, right? So dishonest business practices are stealing. You might say, I don't steal. I don't go in the shop and take something. But if in your business or in your work, you're cheating your employer, you're cheating your employees, you're cheating your business partners or customers, then the Bible classifies that as stealing. Now, example from my own life. No, this is a good one. I didn't actually steal. You don't have to sack me. All right. So we're on holidays in Melbourne and we bought a car, right? You've probably seen our new car out the front. Now, negotiation is an important part of buying a car, right? So, you've got to negotiate on the price or whatever, is happening. And I'll admit, it was tempting for me to try to talk the price down by, claiming things that weren't true. Claiming, but we can't afford to pay that. We don't have the money in our account. It's tempting. I think we went to the Global Leadership Summit and there was a guy there who was an FBI negotiator and he was telling us the best way to negotiate for things. And I'm like, I'm about to buy a car. I really need to listen to this guy. And he's like, and so I had this kind of whole scenario in my head. How am I going to try and convince this guy that he needs to lower the price because I can't afford it? And I'm actually lying. The only reason I'm looking at this car is because I know I can afford it, right? So, apart from just completely losing all my self-respect, if I was lying about whether or not I could afford this car, I think that would be stealing, right? They'd be breaking this commandment not to steal. Now, that's just me, okay? I'm not, I guess it's up for you to decide whether that is what God is saying to you in this. But that's what I think. That's my conviction. But beyond all this negative and what this commandment forbids us, there is a positive, right? These commandments actually tell us something about God's character. So what is it that this commandment tells us about God's character? Well, I think this commandment shows us that God actually values private property, right? God thinks it's good for us to have things. That's probably a revolutionary thought in your mind. Like, God likes things, Now, there are a number of reasons why I believe this is the case, okay? So number one, we go back to commandment number 4. God created work and rest to be good. So one of the reasons why work is good is because it gives us things that we can enjoy when we're resting, right? So we can get things we work and we get things as a reward for working hard. Secondly, everything we have, as we were talking about before, everything we have is God's good gift to us. Everything we have comes from God. He's a loving Father who gives good gifts to his children. Everything we have comes from God. They are good things. If you're stealing, if you're taking things or getting an advantage over someone else, you're actually taking something that God has given to them for them to use. And thirdly, and I think most importantly, is that the things that we own give us an opportunity to demonstrate God's goodness to us by helping others. See, the reason that God gives us what we need is so that we can then help others in their time of need. At the heart of this commandment not to steal is a call towards radical gratitude and generosity with our possessions. As an example, in the musical Les Mis, it's a bit of a smash hit musical, the convict Jean Valjean, he's like the key character, he stumbles into a church to find shelter and he's welcomed by the local priest. But when the priest serves him a meal, looks after him and takes care of his needs, but the utensils he uses are these silver utensils. And Jean Valjean, he can't help. He sees these silver utensils. He can't resist the temptation. And when the priest leaves, he takes them and runs away. Now, shortly afterwards, he's caught by the local police and they drag him back to the church to verify the crime that he's committed. They make him confront the priest, but the priest shows him radical mercy and generosity. He actually claims that he's given him these utensils as a gift for him to use. And in fact, more so, he says, you even forgot the best bit, the silver candlesticks, these priceless treasures in the church, and he gives him the candlesticks as well. Now, of course, the police have nothing to do then. They're like, okay, well, these are gifts, you're not a robber, so they leave. And then the priest, he charges him, use these gifts that I've given you to reform your life. To reform your life and to make a good go of life. He gives him a second chance with his generosity. And of course, this culminates in one of the most moving, parts for me of the series, with Valjean has this crisis of identity, and he sings the song, Who Am I? Now, I was going to have a go at singing it, but given that we have a musical star in the house who's just performed this musical live on stage, I thought I'd get Samuel to give us a couple of lines of the song. Here we go.
Who am I? Can I conceal myself forevermore? Pretend I'm not the man I was before.
There we go. Thank you. Yes. Who am I? See, this radical act of generosity has changed Valjean's. He's cut him right to the core of his identity. Who am I? He reconsiders who he is. And you see in the ensuing parts of the musical that he actually becomes a wealthy factory owner. He actually puts these gifts that he's been given to work. He becomes a wealthy factory owner and a respected leader in his community, all because of this radical act of generosity by the priest. You see, in God's economy, the value of possessions is not in grasping onto them as tightly as we can, trying to fill our lives with more and more stuff and taking things from others. No, the value of our possessions is in our ability to use them to enrich the lives of others, to demonstrate God's goodness towards us as we pass on his generosity to us in generosity to others. Now moving on to, I'm going backwards. There we go. To the second commandment. Now, this one, I think generally we kind of think of the commands. We think this one is don't lie, right? Don't kill, don't steal, don't lie. Well, actually, so God does hate lying, yes, I'll admit that. In fact, it's right up there with the deceitful scales, pretty much every list of what God hates. But this command, I think, is actually much more specific. The last one was quite broad. This one is actually quite specific. It's a very specific form of lying, bearing false witness or false testimony against your neighbour. So to understand this, we need to kind of take our minds back to that time and culture where these commands were given. So in that time, if you had a complaint against someone or you'd been the victim of a crime, you'd need to take that complaint before the leader of your community. And that leader, they would act as a judge. So you and your adversary would both go on trial, and you would need to call witnesses to back up your complaint. Now, there was no forensic science back then. So witnesses were the main form of evidence. And then after hearing each side's case and then hearing from the witnesses, the judge would make a pronouncement that one party was guilty, either of the crime or of bringing a false report, and the other party was innocent. So you can see the role of witnesses is vitally important to the functioning of society. So not only are they vital to achieve justice, but they have great power over people's reputations as well. In fact, I think you could almost sum up these two commands as don't take someone else's things and don't take their reputation. Now, in our modern context, I think it's much less likely that we'll be in a situation where we are called on to be a witness in a legal context. But there are plenty of ways, aren't there, that we can steal someone's reputation. So I believe that this commandment, it's actually about any activity that is likely to unnecessarily damage someone's reputation. And I think we see this most commonly with gossip, right? You know, the words that we speak can have profound impact on other people's reputation. Now you might say, well, hang on, this is about bearing false witness, right? Gossip, isn't that, that's true. You're just saying true stuff about people. That doesn't count. Well, actually, I think there are two problems with that view. So one is, how do you know it's true? Most often with gossip, it's something that you heard. It's second or third hand. It might be hearsay. You don't actually know how many times the story's been changed or embellished along the way. But more importantly, even if what you're saying is true, see, destroying someone's reputation just for the sake of it is not honouring them as someone who is made in God's image. Now, back in commandment number 3, we saw that God takes his own reputation seriously. Don't destroy the reputation of the Lord's name. And what do you think that means for someone who is made in God's image? God has made people in his image. It is a terrible thing to ruin their reputation. And there is a big difference between passing on a genuine concern about someone's suitability for a role. For example, like as a Sunday school leader, if you know that this person maybe shouldn't be working with kids, it's the right thing for you to step up and tell the person responsible, actually, I don't think this person is right for that role. But it's a completely different thing just dropping that story in your everyday conversation with your friends. We need to be very careful about how we speak about others and what stories we pass on. Jono was preaching about gossip earlier in the year, and he gave a very good piece of advice, I think. The best antidote to gossip is to actively be trying to find the best stories about people that we can pass on, to build up people's reputations, not destroy it unnecessarily. But for us as Christians, I believe this command has even more added weight, because there is something that we have all been called to do as Christians. If the role of every Christian, every follower of Jesus, is to be a witness for Christ, isn't it? We are all witnesses to the reality of the good news of Jesus' life, death, and resurrection. We are witnesses to the power of this good news to change our own lives. We're witnesses to the assurance that we have of the hope that Jesus has in store for us. So how does this fit in with this command not to bear false witness? Well, I think the danger that we need to watch out for is that our lives betray a false witness of who Jesus is. You see, I think we're actually much better at destroying our own reputations than we are at destroying other people's reputations. And whether that's like a simple thing like for us as parents, we've chosen not to get our kids to believe in the tooth fairy or Santa Claus because we don't want them to, suddenly wake up one day and realize we've been tricking them about that and think we're also tricking them about Jesus. But even more so, there are other ways that we can ruin our reputation, either by speaking badly about other Christians or churches, by acting in ways that don't reflect the forgiveness and mercy that we've received, or just simply not speaking up at all. See, I think we're actually very good at being false witnesses for Jesus. So where's the good news in all of this? See, the good news is that Jesus has told us how to be true witnesses. In John chapter 13, he says, "This is how everyone will know that you are my disciples, if you love one another." That's how to be true witnesses for Jesus, by loving each other, by loving other Christians. That is how we become true witnesses to the good news of Jesus in our lives. And this is where we find the freedom in these commandments. You see, freedom comes from looking after others' interests ahead of our own. This is what Paul wrote to the Christians at Philippi. In Philippians chapter 2, he says, "Therefore, if you have any encouragement from being united with Christ," and notice how it all begins from first being united with Christ, being one of his people. "If any comfort from his love, if any common sharing in the Spirit, if any tenderness and compassion, then make my joy complete by being like-minded," that is, having the same mind as Christ, having the same love, being one in spirit and of one mind. "Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Rather, in humility, value others above yourselves, not looking to your own interests, but each to the interests of others." Not looking to your own interests, but each to the interests of others. See, freedom comes from putting others' needs ahead of my own. See, God hasn't created us to be grasping at our own reputation, grasping for our own things, but we find freedom in putting others' needs ahead of our own. Like, we're not all in this, drowning in this swimming pool together and trying to scramble on top of each other and pushing others down so we can breathe. That's not the world that God has created. God has created us to find freedom in putting others' needs ahead of our own needs. And this is how we show that we are true witnesses for Jesus, by putting their needs first, by being grateful and generous with the gifts that God has given us, and by protecting the reputation of others, by building up their reputation above our own reputation. As the band comes up, I'm going to pray for us. Lord, we thank you for your commands. Your commands are good, they're not burdensome, and that we can find freedom in what you have commanded. Lord, we pray that you would help us to be generous, to not grasp our possessions tightly, to not be grabbing more and more, but to be grateful to you, the one who has given everything to us, and to find ways of being generous, of meeting the needs of those around us. And Lord, help us to be people who protect one another's reputations, who uphold and build up other people, not tear them down just for the sake of it. Most of all, help us to be true witnesses for you, the good news that you have given to us. In Jesus' name, amen.